to another edition of You Only Live Once, the show in which all your chickens come home to roost. And in the case of tonight's subject, it's the eggs as well. This week, my guest is one of the most well-known and controversial MPs of all time. Ladies and gentlemen, the one, the only, Edwina Currie. Edwina, welcome. Let yourself a hand to cheer. Let yourself comfy. You all right there?
Wow.
Well, we'll start at the beginning. You're a Scouser, apparently. You were born in Liverpool in 1946, named Edwina, after the wife of Lord Mountbatten. Your father, Simon Cohen, who was a tailor, was a strict Ashkenazi Jew. That's the main Orthodox sect. And you were brought up in the Jewish faith. Here you are, with your parents and your little brother Henry. Yes. It wasn't, from what I've read, a particularly intimate upbringing. How was your childhood? I mean, obviously at the time, you don't see it in relief, but looking back on it.
We were very strictly brought up. Mm-hmm. We didn't get birthday presents. We didn't have Christmas.
But did you feel because maybe you didn't get presents and things like that, and did you get approval easily?
No, you had to fight for approval. And one of the aspects of Orthodox Judaism, certainly then, was that boys took precedence. So my younger brother, my little brother, tended to be, I thought, given a lot more attention. I'm sure that's where some of my sort of rather feisty, I'll show them kind of...
Well, that's what I was going to say. I mean, did you feel right from a young age that you really had to fight to get attention, that you had to sort of stand there and go, look at me, look at me, look at me?
Are you saying, Nick, that this explains why I'm such an attention seeker?
No, not at all. I am genuinely interested. Well, you went to the Liverpool Institute for Girls, or Blackburn House, as it was known, and your contemporaries at the local boys' school included future Beatle Paul McCartney, future Tory MP Stephen Norris, and future newsreader Peter Sissons. It's a strange idea, isn't it, to think that Stephen Norris might have been one of the Beatles, named Paul McCartney, isn't it? Although, obviously, he wouldn't have got to sleep with as many women if he'd been in the Beatles, would he?
They all tried strumming, you know. Everybody did it. You sat on somebody's bed in the spare room.
And strummed away.
And you strummed.
We'll move on to that, and in fact, that's good timing, because Stephen Norris, in fact, became your boyfriend, didn't he, when you were quite young? Here's what happened, as related by another parliamentary colleague, Jerry Hayes.
One of the favourite stories going around the tea rooms in the early 1980s was the time that Edwina enjoyed a little bit of slap and tickle on the back row of the cinema in Liverpool. And who did she enjoy this little bit of slap and tickle and tongue exercise? Well, none other than Steve Norris, who else, of course, a fellow Liverpudlian. But unfortunately, Mr. Cohen, Edwina's dad, got to hear about it. And Steve, being a gentleman, led her quietly up the garden path, as he's been doing to women ever since, and suddenly found himself confronted with a Mr. Cohen who was apoplectic with rage. He'd heard that there'd been a little bit of naughtiness going on in the cinema with his beloved daughter, so here he was, in his hand, face suffused with rage, and a shovel in his hand, chasing after Steve down the bottom of the garden.
I think there's a bit of embroidery going on there, and anyway, it wasn't the back of the cinema, it's around the back of the bike shed at school.
But your dad was actually there with the shovel. I mean, I know he didn't want you to go out with non-Jewish boys, but did he want to, like, circumcise Steve there and then?
Not sure whether he needed it.
You tell us! But it was made very clear that you should go out with a Jewish boy, if possible.
It wasn't something in the end that I was at all happy about, that kind of restriction. And I didn't think, personally, that Jewish people who'd had discrimination practiced against them should be like that. Mm.
Well, here's what Steve Norris himself had to say on the subject.
Well, Edwina and I did, of course, have well-publicised liaison of sorts, incidentally well-publicised by me, apart from anything else, so, I mean, I can't claim any external credit. But that was all a very long time ago. I suspect it was not the most important experience in her life. It wasn't even the most important in mine. But it was very enjoyable at the time, all part of the great learning process. She taught me I was a lousy kisser, so there you go. One enduring lesson in my life.
I hate to break it to you, Edwina, but you know that passionate kiss, he was actually just trying to keep you quiet for half an hour, I believe.
It didn't work.
And did he keep you happy? I mean, what went on? What I'm trying to say, obviously... In my rather clumsy way, is the question that I believe that all the audience want to know is, did you?
Let me tell you something. We were teenagers. This is the 1960s, and it's an exciting and vibrant and wonderful time. But if you did anything other than strum the guitar in the bedroom, you got pregnant. So we didn't, I'm afraid. And I don't know, maybe now I wish.
So, Steve, if you're out there, mate, there could be some afters. Now, despite your family's stern moral code, you were always slipping out for a quiet drink. You used to pretend you were going for a coffee at the Wavertree Coffee House, which was really a pub, wasn't it?
That's right.
Didn't you used to go to the Cavern?
We went to the Cavern, and the Cavern was a remarkably innocent place.
It was meant to be you at the front.
I think it must be. Somebody showed me that photo once, and I thought, if it isn't me, it's somebody very like me. But that's how we were.
Yeah.
We were all crammed in together, yelling like mad for our favourites. I think I was in love with the big three, who were 3 Liverpool dockers at the time. And it was very innocent. There was no licence there. You couldn't actually drink in the Cavern.
Right, so sort of Coca-Cola still way past 8 o'clock.
That's right.
Thing, yeah.
Scilla Black was the hat check girl. And she was quite a character in her own right even then. She was tiny and very pretty and red-haired, but she was very strict. If you left your coat and you wanted something out of it, you had to take it out, take whatever you wanted, and then pay her again to put the coat back in.
Now, your father wanted you to be a hairdresser, but disappointingly for him, you won a scholarship to Oxford in 1964. And on the train up for the interview was a fellow passenger, Helen Hale.
Shortly after leaving Liverpool, this very self-possessed, confident, but very friendly girl of about my own age popped her head through the door and said, "Hi, are you up for interview as well?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "Which university?" "Oxford," said I. "So am I," said Edwina. "Which college?" "St Anne's College." I said, "So am I." And then, "Which subject?" "Chemistry." "So am I." At this point I thought, well, if they're all like her, I might as well get off the train now.
And that was just at Crewe, and by then the train was completely empty, I imagine. The driver got off at Banbury, didn't he? But where did this confidence come from? I mean, you know, the idea we have of teenagers now is sort of... But you were obviously fantastically confident.
But it was exactly the same as I am now.
Yeah, but where did it come from?
There's a lot of lip, but there's a lot of nerves, you know. Little heart is going bump, bump, bump.
But were you similarly sort of outspoken with your parents or not?
I tried always at home to treat my parents with the respect that the religion expects. And I do feel strongly about that. But it did mean that in the end we didn't talk through those issues. And when it came to a bust-up, it was a big one, and that was very sad.
Now, when you were at Oxford, you joined the Oxford Union Debating Society. There you are, in a sexy little dress that you made from a pair of curtains. And, among the other leading lights were 2 future Tory MPs, William Waldegrave and Giles Brandreth. In fact, you all took part in a BBC documentary about the Oxford Union.
Good evening, ladies. What the hell are you doing here? Don't worry, of course, I'm only teasing. You see, I know why you're here. You're here because this is 8th week, and you've come to listen to the union buffoons showing off, to hear the old smutty jokes with the similar double entendres thrown at you once again.
See, where's your dad with a shovel when you need him, eh? Now, you actually went out with Giles Brandreth, didn't you?
We all went round in a big crowd.
Yeah.
And Giles particularly was great, because you could always rely on him when things got a little flat or dull to stand on his head.
So even
Marvellous.
then he was talking out of his arse, then. Here's what he had to say about the experience.
I vividly remember having tea with her in the Union Library, a wonderful strawberry cream tea, dollops of cream, and wonderful juicy strawberries. And I can still picture, actually, a strawberry falling from her lips. She was quite sexy in her own way, if you like that sort of thing. I can remember it sort of falling from her mouth onto a scone. And about 30 years later, when we were both in the House of Commons, she presented me with a copy of her first novel. And it fell open at a page, and I glanced down, and there she was, having a strawberry tea of a different kind with this fellow. All I can tell you was that the strawberry didn't fall on his scone.
So where did it fall? His cream horn? Is that what you say? But it's interesting, isn't it, that you had a liaison, however...
We were all mates. We didn't sort of pair off at university in quite the same way. Not least because at Oxford at that time, there were 5 blokes to each girl.
Yeah.
So if I'd paired off, it would have been rather selfish.
But it wasn't just at Oxford, because... that's true. Good maths, yeah. It wasn't just Oxford, though, because you'd had a brief relationship with Stephen Norris, who became a Tory MP, then Giles Brandreth, who became a Tory MP. Were you attracted to people who you saw as sort of thrusting and ambitious, or is it just that when you kiss someone, they become a Tory MP?
I think part of the problem was that I'd often be attracted to the company of people who could talk as much as I did. Mm-hmm. But after a while, I just wanted them to listen. Mm-hmm. So they'd drift off and find more complacent and perhaps calmer women than myself. Mm. But we had a great time. At one stage, I was going out with the entire St John's College second boat crew, all of them. Pretty good at that age.
Did the Oxford 8 do badly? Too knackered to carry on? Was that
no, this was after. We made a point of it after they had won. After they had won.
And what about Giles? I mean, not to be repetitive, I asked about Stephen, but I mean, did you?
He talks more than I do. We couldn't actually find a spare quiet moment. No, I'm afraid.
When you left Oxford, you joined Arthur Anderson's as a trainee chartered accountant, and there you met Ray, your future husband, at the firm's Christmas dance. Now, Ray wasn't Jewish, and you married him in church. Presumably this went down like a lead balloon with your father.
My father was very upset, and I heard afterwards that he did the traditional thing and had a funeral service for me.
How much do you feel regret, and how much do you feel upset, and how much do you feel defiance?
Well, when you're in your 20s and you're in love and you're all preoccupied with a house and a mortgage and getting married and babies and little dog and your new life, your parents' dislike or disapproval actually becomes a rather shrunken thing. Mm. It's not until you're their sort of age that you suddenly realise they wanted the best for you. Mm. What's been lucky is that my mother is still alive. She's a grand, feisty old lady of 88, and we are very close. Mm. I only wish that my father had lived on. He didn't. He died 4 years after that. He never saw his granddaughter, Debbie. I think the loss was his, and that it shortened his life, and that when he died 4 years later, he was a much more bitter man than he should have been. And that's tragedy.
It is. Now, you switched careers to become an economics tutor at Kingston College, but your real ambition from the age of 19 was to become a Tory MP on the basis that you agreed with most of what was in the Daily Telegraph, apparently. Well, that meant you either had to become a Tory MP or a retired colonel in Weybridge. Now, it seems to me that both of the jobs, the one that you took up and the one you wanted, tutor and MP, involved giving advice. Now, is it that you want to help people? Is it that you want to see things done properly? Or is it that you actually like telling people what to do?
Well, all of those. All of those. I mean, you've got to add one more thing to it.
Well, 600 men, obviously.
Yes, the one thing you've got to add is that this particular lady has an unfortunate capacity for believing she's always right.
Well, in preparation for that parliamentary career, your first step to becoming a Tory MP was to become a Birmingham councillor in 1975, and you made sure you got on all the important committees, and you made your biggest splash at the 1981 Tory conference. Here's Stephen Norris again.
My very first party conference, Blackpool. I went in just basically to see what it was all about. And there was this young person at the rostrum, gesticulating wildly, waving handcuffs, for God's sake. Quite good looking. And I looked at her and I thought, my God, that's Edwina Currie, isn't it? And sure enough, it said Edwina, but this time it was Edwina Currie. Absolutely typical Edwina, barnstorming performance, totally cynical. Not sure I believed a word of it, but very, very impressive.
And so I brought something very interesting, Mr. Chairman. I brought a pair of handcuffs. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to chain myself to the rostrum or anything like that.
It obviously wasn't you. He recognised it was the handcuffs, was it? Let me ask you one question before we go on. What on earth are you wearing? Had you been at the hairdressers and then you were a bit late?
It looked good in Birmingham, let's put it like that.
Mm. But a brilliant PR trick. I mean, the handcuffs, you were going to be remembered. Were you aware? Was it a cynical ploy?
Yeah, yes and no. I used to do a bit of teaching at the West Midlands Training School for the police, Tally-Ho. And on one occasion, just before that, I said to the inspector who was in charge, if you've got 4 minutes in front of the world, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, to talk on law and order, what would you say? And he pulled out his handcuffs and said, I'd wave these.
I mean, were you aware?
And I said, can I borrow your handcuffs?
Ah, so they were his, were they? Were you aware of
the
sexual connotation of handcuffs? Because the Arts Minister, Lord Gowrie, said at the time that when you held up the handcuffs, he experienced a bat squeak of desire.
He was the guy that couldn't afford to be a minister, isn't he?
Lord Gowrie, that's right, yeah. Well, by 1983, you'd applied to more than 40 constituencies, and you finally got one, the marginal seat of Derbyshire South. Your Labour opponent was, and I quote, a nice little lad called Peter Kent, and you said, I eat people like Peter Kent for breakfast. And obviously you did, because you increased the Tory majority from 900 to 9,000. On your first day in the House of Commons, you were allocated a shared office with fellow Tory MP Richard Hickmott. And here's his reaction when the Chief Whip told him the news.
He told me, Hickmott, I've found your office. You'll be on the committee floor. Does that suit you? Is that all right? Oh, that's wonderful. Oh, good. Well, you'll be sharing with Edwina Currie. Oh, no. I received a summons from Edwina Currie, who wanted to interview me about the terms of reference upon which we would be sharing this office. I attended, together with Chris Chope. I went into the office. She told me, well, I've rearranged the furniture. I've moved this desk there and that desk there. You will be sitting there. Told me what time we'd be operating, what time we wouldn't. And then she gave me my lifeline when she asked me, by the way, do you smoke? Oh, yes. Yes, I'm a 40-a-day man. I'd given up smoking for some years, in fact. Oh, no, I can't possibly have that. And I escaped.
Well, how he laughed as he was ushered into his new office, sharing with the young Adam Widdicombe in a busk. Now, Mrs Thatcher quickly spotted your potential, not surprisingly, after you'd brandished it under her nose, and in 1986 she decided to promote you to Junior Health Secretary. Here's one of her whips at the time, Lord David Hunt.
Perhaps the biggest mistake I ever made was to indicate to Edwina that she might well be hearing something to her advantage in the reshuffle. What I hadn't realised was that she then invited camera crews and the whole of the media of the nation round to her home as she awaited the phone call.
Well, I'm in Derbyshire, but I can come down if she would like me to. Fine, will do. See you then. Okay, bye.
So what's the news?
I'm summoned to Downing Street.
It's a shame, really, because you were about to nip out and buy some furniture, I would hope.
I wasn't actually expecting a call. That is not fair. What happened that morning was the TV crew turned up from a local TV station and said, you're going to be promoted and we are going to stay here, so you might as well invite us in for a cup of tea.
Yeah, but it's still happening now, isn't it? I mean, I invite you for a quiet drink, and look, we've got 4 cameras and an audience of 200 people. Now, but you obviously did have an eye for publicity, didn't you? Because you were on the news just about every night. Here's you, jogging with some soldiers.
Oh, weren't the soldiers gorgeous?
Well, I love that. It looks like you've just come out of a bush as they've gone past. And here's you at the unveiling of a painting at the House of Commons. Now, it's quite quick, this, but just look, everyone, at the smooth way in which Edwina gets rid of the woman between her and the camera.
The MPs jostled like eager fourth-graders trying to get first glimpse of the school photo.
I love that, I love that. I think it's great. Let's just see it in slow motion, because it's beautifully done. Were you sort of aware of doing those things? Of trying to turn up when there was a photo opportunity, of trying to make sure your face was seen, of trying to make sure that your message was heard?
Yes, and I think you have to. And one of the reasons why Parliament's held in such low esteem these days is most of the MPs don't do any of that. So nobody knows who they are, don't recognise them, don't stop them in the street, have no idea what their message is or what issues they stand for, what they care about, what matters to them, and what they're against. They become very faceless. They become wallpaper.
Well, you were made a junior health minister, and you certainly made headlines in that job when you regularly handed out pithy and sometimes amusing advice to the nation. Asked what British businessmen could take to guard against catching AIDS abroad, you said, the wife. On the subject of Northerners, you said they make themselves ill through ignorance and crisps. To 700 staff about to be laid off from a Pirelli tyre plant, you suggested go and work in China.
No, I didn't. No, I did not. I got very...
As reported.
Yeah, well, yeah, it was actually the management that suggested that, and they got a right piece of my mind as a result of that.
All right, then, but to pensioners at risk from hypothermia, you recommended knit some woolly hats. That's the only time, I believe, there's ever been a fatwa from Age Concern.
It was in fact the advice of Age Concern, which I thought was rather funny, and I read it out. The trouble is I then got landed with the believed authorship of it. It wasn't such terrible advice in the end, I'm afraid.
Well, what about when you were warned that old people could die during a cold snap and you replied, we've all got to die sometime? I mean, it's true,
Yes.
obviously, but...
I think what was happening a little bit during that winter, and we were working very hard, and I suspect the current government occasionally gets the same feeling about it, is that sometimes there's a feeling abroad that you can keep people alive forever. And not only can't you, but it's not always the best way of doing it. I didn't want people to get so ill that they had to come into hospital. My job on the preventive side was to try and get good advice across to them, to try and make sure that they didn't get sick in the first place.
Do you think sometimes you get asked so many puerile questions that presume you haven't thought about things when you obviously have, that sometimes you just snap back because you're just fed up that people aren't giving you a sensible line of questioning?
It's the point at which being pure scouse comes back.
Right.
And when you go straight at somebody, and it makes a good soundbite, and afterwards you think, did I really say that? Oh,
Now,
dear.
because of this, though, certain sections of society took against you, including a large number of Tory MPs. In the end, there was actually an organised anti-Edwina society in Parliament. Here's Giles Brandreth.
She rubbed people up to such an extent the wrong way that some of the Tory MPs formed this thing called the Currie Club, where all the things that Edwina said were bad for you to eat, they wanted to eat. They stuffed their faces with pork pie and, you know, jam butties, and, oh, they ate and they drank, and they did it all in honour of Edwina, to defy her. Indeed, they would be here today to take part in this tribute, were any of them still alive.
Well, they're not really dead, are they? They're just all hiding in Richard Hickmett's office.
Heart disease and liver disease, I'm afraid, which is a pity.
But how much do you think that sort of resistance to you was down to the fact that you were a woman and these were all men who couldn't cope with your refusal to be what they expected of you? I mean, how much was it that they just didn't really like the idea of women being in their House of Commons?
That was there a lot. The feeling that women should be at home, cooking or cleaning or bringing up children, or perhaps a headmistress. They couldn't cope with Margaret Thatcher. And while Margaret was the Prime Minister, I think they found that anybody else like that was just one person too many.
It must have been very difficult, because there's an extraordinary piece of film of a Lords versus Commons rifle shooting event where you went along to try out for the Commons team, and they'd never had a woman before. Some of the remarks in this are quite amazing.
Really don't think it's right to see these women come down here strolling about on the turf like this.
Fine problems, I think, handling the rifle for the first time. Never mind, it's very game over.
But the rifles are very heavy. You must accept that a woman's wrist is considerably less strong than a man's.
Well, that's good. It's a bullseye.
I imagine you would get a bullseye. You're probably imagining shooting at their heads.
Weren't they a load of absolute
What a load of nonsense.
so-and-sos?
It's fantastic, isn't it? But famously, of course, you were the only junior minister with her own spitting image puppet. Did that flatter you in a way?
Yes, and it's misleading in the sense that those people who weren't on Spitting Image wish they were, and those that were on it very gradually began to wish that they were not. The first effect of that was I went and got my front teeth fixed. Didn't reckon I wanted to look like that at all.
It says about you in parliamentary profiles that your skin is armour-plated, bulletproof and missile resistant. Is that true? I mean, is anybody that impervious to attack?
No. And there were times when you come home and think, what am I doing in this job? You know, I could be doing it. I could have been an accountant. I got upset if it affected the family.
Yeah, how did the family feel?
Well, I got particularly upset on one occasion when photographers turned up at my children's school, and somebody in the school, a member of staff, not teaching staff, started to talk to the press about my daughters. And I was incandescent because I felt that my children didn't choose to be my children and that they should have their privacy. I have a lot of sympathy for the Blairs as they try to maintain the privacy of their children. Not that the children seem to do it very well. They seem to be very willing to be in the news.
But your children obviously respected your blunt speaking, and obviously it was just, you did the same at home as you did in the Commons. Here's your daughter, Debbie.
One of the best things about my mum is her absolute solidarity. She would stick up for me to absolutely anybody. And a good example of that is when I was kicked out of school when I was 17, right at the end, done on my exams, but hadn't yet had the parties. And the headmaster said to me, I want you out of the school and I never want to see you on school grounds again. So I came home and I remember hearing my dad talking to my mum on the telephone And he came through to me, he said, "I cannot believe your mother." He said, "I've just been trying to explain to her what you've actually done and how terrible you are." And I said to her, "Do you realise that your daughter called her headmaster a right to his face?" And my mum turned around to him and said, "Well, he is a
Mind you always liked the geography teacher, Mr. Arsehole, didn't you?
One has to remember, of course, one's children are sometimes chips off the old block as well.
Now, Debbie famously made the newspapers in her own right when she stripped off and posed with, amongst other things, some fried eggs. What did you think about that?
I thought she was very foolish, because that, first of all, that linked her to me. And she didn't need that. She, as you can see, she's a beautiful girl in her own right, very talented, and she could have made her own career without any of that. She got kind of talked into it, and I think now she would say that that was probably a mistake.
Now, this tendency you had to speak your mind, to tell the truth, however unpalatable, was eventually to bring about your downfall. On the 4th of December 1988, you famously remarked, "Most of the country's egg production is affected by salmonella. The egg industry lost £19 million in sales, and you lost your job." But it was true, wasn't it? I mean, what you said was, strictly speaking, absolutely accurate.
It took about 10 years for the egg industry to come to terms with the mess they've made of their own industry. My anxiety at the time was that they were killing people, because that kind of food poisoning was actually very serious. It was very dangerous. It was new. The bug had mutated or something. And we were losing about one person a week who was dying of it. We lost far, far more people from that than we've ever lost through BSE and CJD. I didn't know then about the cover-ups that had been going on in the Ministry of Agriculture. When I found out, I was very angry. The egg industry was in a mess. We didn't know then either that the beef industry was in exactly the same mess, and that disease had been allowed to spread through the industry in a way that is quite reprehensible.
But do you feel
it's nasty stuff?
That obviously it was an important message to get across, but do you feel that the way you said it, A, didn't get the message across, and B, you wish that you'd said it in a different way?
I didn't realise what the reaction was going to be. I mean, the first thing was that the British public believed me and stopped buying eggs. I didn't actually tell them not to buy eggs. I told them to cook them properly, but people took a risk assessment view, and that's what happened. The second thing that surprised me was that the industry said absolute rubbish, whereas what they should have said was, "Yep, we've got a problem, can we work together, let's try and solve it," which is what happened in other countries like Sweden, where they don't have the problem at all. And the third thing was that my colleagues, instead of saying, "Oh, bloody Edwina again," said, "Let's get her out, this is the opportunity."
When were you aware, then, that this was, hold on, it's all gone badly wrong, the career's in ruins, this is not going to be something I can salvage?
Well, many colleagues have had to leave office for a while and then come back in.
Yeah.
So the feeling at the time was it was only temporary. And indeed, when I asked Margaret if I could leave out the back door, because the press were all around the front, and she said, "Yes, and next time I see you, you're coming through the front door." Then I didn't realise that that was actually not going to happen.
Now, in the 1990s, you were offered one or two dead-end posts, but effectively your political career was past its peak. So you created another career for yourself as a successful novelist. Your first book, A Parliamentary Affair, went straight to #1, selling 250,000 copies in several languages. The main character, a female MP called Elaine Stalker, has straight sex, gay sex, over-the-desk sex, oral sex, anal sex, al fresco sex, chocolate sex, and fruit sex. Was she based on you? We have to ask.
I think you will need to wait for my memoirs to find out all the truth.
Yeah.
But in fact, an awful lot of the stories that went into the two parliamentary novels came from just sitting in the House of Commons tea room.
Yeah. So
and listening to the blokes boasting about their conquests.
Because I was reading this bit here. Elaine balanced the smallest fruit gently on the very penis tip. Is that Giles Brandreth's penis tip with
It was somebody's, but I'm not going to say.
You're not going to say who? OK. Well, we've actually got an extract of you reading from your second novel, A Woman's Place. Here it is.
"We need some massage cream," he told her, and reached across for a half-full jug. She felt the trickle of chocolate cream between her shoulder blades and opened one startled eye to see a naked George, a wide grin on his face, clearly ready for her. Then he parted her legs and knelt between them, leaned over her back and gently licked it all off.
Anyway, leave your message after the tone. Now, you were nominated for the Literary Review's Bad Sex Award in 1997 for one sex scene. Unfortunately, we don't have a tape of you reading it, but I'll do my best. His breath came in rasping spurts, interspersed with a loud belch, which interrupted his rhythm. For a moment, she was terrified he might be sick, right there on her face. Then, he suddenly shuddered and shook himself like a dog. Have you been to my house? Seriously, though, writing about sex, is that a turn-on in itself?
Yes.
Is it?
Yes.
Is it exciting?
If it doesn't turn me on, I reckon it ain't going to turn anybody on. But if it turns me on, then maybe a few of my readers might enjoy it as well.
Now, sadly, your marriage to Ray Currie broke up in September 1997 after 25 years. Was that a sudden thing, or was it something you felt was coming?
It took a long time. He is an exceptionally nice man. I'm still very fond of him, but our lives have gone in different directions.
Right.
As people's do.
It was interesting reading the books that I noticed that your heroines in a lot of your books, particularly Helen Majinsky, the star of She's Leaving Home, is a feisty Jewish girl from Liverpool, and they're all a bit like you, but all of them end up with the handsome fighter pilots, and Ray was an accountant. And I just wondered if subliminally you were telling yourself something here.
When you write fiction, you can have a lot of fun creating characters as you would wish them to be. And there was an element of writing heroes that I would have fallen in love with.
Yeah.
In fact, with the very first novel, I found that I was having trouble finishing it. And my agent said to me, "Oh, you're making the classic mistake. You've fallen in love with your hero. Kill him off. The quicker the better."
Now, you were an MP all this time, but in a marginal seat like South Derbyshire. You must have known that the game would be up at the 1997 election. You could see the Tory campaign going badly wrong, but when you raised your concerns, they just said, "It's that bloody woman again," didn't they? They didn't really listen to you.
What I was really trying to say to the party hierarchy was wise up. If you keep talking about how we're going to win, then you're going to lose much worse. If you concentrate hard and regroup, you know, like in a military campaign, then you will save a lot that you might otherwise lose. And they took no notice.
Now, we've reached the present, and looking back on your life, is there one thing that you would do differently, or one thing that you would change at all?
I'd change my shape. If I had my way, I'd have a nice slim backside. If I had my way, I'd look like my daughter Debbie, who is gorgeous.
Well, we're going to play out with another Edwina TV appearance when you sportingly agreed to be covered in gunge on Noel's house party. Ladies and gentlemen, a big thank you to Edwina Currie.
Celebrity chef and wine lover Keith Floyd on You Only Live Once next week. It's a bumpy ride out of the boat and there's a race to be won. Gold Fever next on BBC One.